Welcome, everybody, to the Unmapped Podcast. This week, I'm joined again by Chris and Michael. How are we doing, guys?
Doing all right.
Yeah, I'm doing good. Good.
Okay, so this week we are looking at some topical data for the first time. There's some, obviously, there's been some big news events breaking recently. We've got obviously the Turkey earthquake, and then there's some other stuff from the UK that we're going to cover. So I'm going to open the floor open. I'm going to make the floor open. Chris, I'll go to you first. What have you got prepared?
Well, before I get into that, because the subjects we're covering today are a little bit somber. Okay, So what I wanted to do before that is, first of all, I wanted to give a shout out because some people are starting to watch this podcast. We're not just speaking to thin air anymore. There's a few people watching. Okay, and I know it's going to start from small beginnings. So I want to give a shout out first of all. We got a comment on the last podcast. Lawrence is going to give a shout out to the first commenter on the Unmapped podcast.
Yeah, that was Sam Hughes, who commented earlier this week. He seemed to be enjoying it and talking, said he'd be a regular viewer. So yeah, shout out to Sam Hughes.
Our first fan.
Yeah. So cheers, Sam. Cheers for the comment on the podcast. Hopefully you're watching this one today. Now, like I said, everything starts from small beginnings, and we're only getting like a few dozen listeners or viewers at the moment on the podcast. So our aim for this one is 100. I want to get to 100. So if any of you are watching this, please share it out, share it on Twitter, or do something like right now. Hit the pause button, go and share it on Twitter. We want to get to 100. We'll give you all a shout out on the next podcast. We promise. Okay, share this good content out there. So that's how I wanted to start. Just a little bit of a request to our few dozen viewers. Michael, have you been stopped on the street yet and recognized for your?
I have. I've been doing book signings all week. Actually, we're famous here in Southeast Asia already.
Oh yeah,
but they're bootlegging it, so they're not watching live. They're seeing ripped copies, so it doesn't come up as ratings. But
yeah, that's it. That was the old thing. Remember the bands? It was like big in Japan,
Yeah, I'm huge in Asia. Yeah,
that's us. In terms of content today, I think the sort of general theme of the podcast today is going to be about how open data is used in investigation. So maybe, Aaron, if you could pull up my screen a second. There we are. So this sort of general theme of open source intelligence. So this is something I got quite interested in during the Ukraine war. So open source intelligence is where basically you're crowdsourcing intelligence. You're using a community on the internet to crowdsource public sources of information in order to build an intelligence picture. And there was a lot of coverage of this during the Ukraine war, and a lot of the coverage was saying that some of the open source intelligence was superior to state-level intelligence. The number of people that were involved just were able to build up a clearer picture and a more up-to-date picture. They were doing things like georeferencing and time dating pictures of blown-up military equipment in order to do counts of what had been destroyed, and also being able to draw where the front line is based on photos that were coming back in via social media. So that was very interesting stuff. I think we'll look at that in more detail in another episode. But today, the first thing that I wanted to look at in relation to that is the case of Nicola Bulley in the UK. So there's a very sad case here of a mother and a wife who disappeared. She was out walking her dog. She dropped the kids at school, gone to a spot where she walks the dog each day, and then she's vanished. Now, I wasn't paying much attention to this in the news in the beginning because it looked like she was walking the dog next to a river, and the police came out pretty early with a statement saying, we believe that somehow she's fallen into the river and likely drowned, which was kind of sad. But now we're on kind of day 14, and it's getting, if she'd gone in the river and she'd drowned, they would expect to have found a body already. So apparently, when people drown, they usually go to the bottom. Their lungs fill with water. They go to the bottom, and then they resurface. If it's warm weather, within 2 days. If it's cold weather, within 7 days, and then are found. And unfortunately, I've experienced this firsthand. We had a near drowning. My house in Cambodia, we had a pool there, and we had a near drowning there. We had family friends round, and all the kids were in the pool. And one of the kids, unfortunately drowned. The other kids didn't even notice. They just saw one of the kids, a 7-year-old, on the bottom of the pool, and they thought he was playing. They thought he was just, he's just down there and he's playing, holding his breath on the bottom. And then they realized what had happened. He had actually drowned, got him out of the pool. Fortunately, I was able to revive him. And, he had a stint in hospital. You get a lot of water in your lungs, but he full recovery. So had a good outcome in this case. But at that time, I actually looked into drowning because I never realized that people sink when they drown. I thought you kind of float on the top. That's what I always expected someone drowning would be on top. So, yeah, in this case, that's what a lot of it has focused around, about if the lady drowned in the river, where would she move on to afterwards? And they've had police divers in there, specialist equipment and sonar. The river basically flows this way, and they've inspected all of the river now. And if you follow the river for a few miles, eventually it goes out to sea. So I'm not going to speculate on any of this because I have no idea. It's not my area of expertise. But what's been interesting is the amount of open source intelligence where people outside of the police investigation have been using maps, ordnance survey, photographs that have been taken from the scene in order to build up their own, to do their own analysis.
Just to interrupt you for a second, how is that data collected? Like, is it submitted to like a website, or like how did they get this all in one place?
It seems kind of ad hoc. At the moment. So with the open source intelligence they do for Ukraine, there's kind of wiki pages and things where it's all been set up. A lot of it at the moment seems to be around Reddit and YouTube. So what sent me down this rabbit hole is this popped up on my YouTube channel yesterday. So there's a channel here, a bit of an unfortunate name, Grizzly True Crime, but grizzly as in the bear. And the presenter on this one is she just did a good job of just basically summarizing all of the open data that was out there at the moment. She wasn't drawing any conclusions. She wasn't like wildly speculating, because I think that's a problem as well. There's probably a balance with this kind of open source intelligence between being helpful and being insightful, and also being conspiratorial. So I'm sure there's a negative side of this as well. But she basically went through, I'll put it on mute so we don't see it, and I'll just skip to various stages. But she was pulling up photographs, video feeds, any CCTV that had been released in public, going through all of the maps. And then at the end, she was speaking with a crime scene analysis or an investigator who had a lot of experience in the US police force about what he thought about the open source data that was available at the moment. Once again, he was very professional. He wasn't wildly speculating. Was very sympathetic towards the family. But it was kind of interesting, the amount of data that's out there. So what happened in the video is they were pulling up Google Maps here, and I'll just give you a quick summary because it was kind of interesting. So there's the school. She dropped her kids off at school somewhere in this village. And then apparently every day she parks the car and then comes and walks the dogs in these fields here. You can kind of see these well-trodden paths where dog walkers are walking around the field. She was seen by somebody she knows in the park with their dog. They kind of said hello. She was normal. She joined a Zoom call with work. So she was on a live Zoom call with the camera and the mic turned off. She sent a message to a friend saying, let's organize a play date for the kids later. So like everything seems to be completely normal. And then she kind of disappeared. It was like there's this gap. Last time she was seen was 9:10. They found her phone on a bench just here in the corner of the field, and the dog was just loose running around, and the dog wasn't wet. So, the obvious thing to think in the beginning for the investigators, she's fallen in the river. But as the days have gone by, they've used sonar and things to inspect the river, both upstream and downstream, and haven't found her. And now they're actually looking in the sea. But the thing that's got the sort of speculation going here in the UK is there's actually a weir here. There's a weir here in the river that blocks the flow. So, if somebody had fallen in the river, how would they get past the weir? Anyway, I'm not going to go into it further. I just thought it was an interesting use case, and it will be interesting to see whether. So the police are still saying that their working theory is that she fell in the river. A lot of people in this open source intelligence are asking questions about, well, we think it's less likely that she fell into the river. Here are the places that are covered by CCTV. Here are the possible routes out. So, I'm hoping the best possible outcome here, in my mind, is that she's decided to run away. She's decided that she's upset and she's fine somewhere and she'll come back. I think that's the best possible outcome anybody can hope for right now.
Sure.
But the sort of speculation or the sort of conflicting, the two other possible scenarios at the moment are that there was some kind of third party involvement or that she's in the river. So it would just be interesting to see whether this kind of open data comes to a better conclusion than what the police are working with. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there. I've talked on too long. Any of you guys got any thoughts on any of this?
Well, yeah, I think the interesting point about this is, and I think it leads nicely into what I wanted to talk about today. This whole idea of crowdsourcing data by people just coming together and being able to crowdsource that data, and how quickly people can come together in order to do that, and the impact that it can have is quite incredible. The example I wanted to talk about today was obviously the Turkey and Syria earthquakes that happened on February the 6th, so a few days ago. Just to give a quick overview, I found some interesting graphs. If you could share my screen, please. So there were actually 100 plus earthquakes within what happened in Turkey and Syria. There were two that were in the very high range, which is 7.8 and 7.6. There's a graph that I think this is a little bit old, because I think the death toll now is over 21,000. But and just to give you an idea of the Richter scale, this is something that I didn't know before, but the Richter scale, each number that goes up, it's an exponential, so it's a 10x. So it actually, a 6 is 10 times stronger than a 5, and then a 7 is 10 times stronger than a 6. So as you can see, it compounds exponentially up to 8 and 9. The ones in Turkey and Syria were classified as major, so that's 7. So that can destroy buildings and cause serious damage. And if you've seen some of the images from there this week, that's essentially what happened. So this graph here, it shows the first magnitude 7.8 quake, and then a few hours later there was the 7.6 quake, and this is on the Turkey-Syria border. This spans a period of about 30 hours, and you can see each of the yellow dots in this map. That's essentially an aftershock or a smaller earthquake. Now they're around 4 on the Richter scale, so they're just minor. Well, they're not minor; they're actually serious events. But the two big ones were, like I said, 7.6 and 7.8. So that's over a period of 30 hours, and there was 109 going on there.
Hey, Lawrence, forgive my ignorance, but is this like a common thing in Turkey? Like, I feel like we hear about earthquakes in California or Japan all the time, but this is the first one that I feel like that I can recall that's made major headlines in this region.
From the research that I did, it's actually a very, very active area. And this graphic here, I think, explains it quite well. So you actually have some of the strongest earthquakes in Turkey over the past 24 years, so since 1999. It's by far, the second was in 1999. That was Istanbul. So the death toll there was 17,500. And then over there are 8 in total, so there are 6 more. The death toll is around 800 or 600. So this is 21,000 now. We've seen 8 major events over the past 24 years or so. So it is somewhat active, but this is the worst one that we've had since 1999, and we don't really know if the death toll has peaked. Yeah, I imagine it will increase in the coming days. Now, you say, is it active? This is actually from the United States Geographical Survey. So this is also open data. And what this map does is it shows you the active earthquakes over the past 24 hours. And this is all over the world. So we've had one in China, we've had one in Indonesia. If we look at this cluster here, so this is the past 24 hours, we've had a further 6 smaller earthquakes. This is 15 kilometers southwest. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, but it just shows you, I think this illustrates it quite well, that this area is active in terms of earthquakes, and you know, as I showed on the previous graph, that we're actually, this goes back over the last 20 years or so, that this is actually something that's been ongoing. So with all that in mind...
Just a quick comment there. Istanbul, just in my head thinking about it, Istanbul is where Asia meets Europe. I'm wondering if they're two separate plates.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, I don't know. It could be something to find out for sure.
So how's open data been playing a part in that? Because that's the interesting thing here. So the theme of it today is like basically open source intelligence. So we looked at the first one with the Nicola Bulley thing. So we're looking at how, you know, basically open source intelligence is now being used in crime investigation. That's quite controversial because there are often thoughts about, you know, that could upset the family if people are coming up with alternative theories to the police. Maybe it's getting in the way of the police because, you know, the police may know things that we don't know, and they're, you know, maybe they're throwing some curveballs out there to get something done over here. Like, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. But I think open source intelligence in the humanitarian sector is something that's very much not controversial. It's something that's been around a long time. So I was actually involved with a project called Instead, or an organization called Instead, for the Haiti earthquake. So when the Haiti earthquake happened, I can't remember the year, it was a lot of years ago now. But anyway, Instead was founded by Larry Brilliant. He was the guy who eradicated smallpox, and it was started with a TED prize. And the idea was to bring Silicon Valley thinking and open source technology and apply those to humanitarian causes. And one of the first places that was rolled out was Haiti. So we were doing interesting things around, you know, communication often breaks down when you've had a disaster like that. So we were building like a chat platform that could have incoming messages come via telephone, SMS, the internet, and correlate those messages and have eventual consistency. So even if the connection between two people was down right now, next time they're back, they'll get that message and they will get those updates. So there was some cool stuff there. So what's been going on in Turkey with relation to open data?
Okay, well, I think, like you said, it's not controversial, and I think that what's actually been happening on in Turkey and Syria. Erin, if you could please bring up the task manager in Hot OSM. It's a really great example of how this works when it really does work. So Hot OSM, Chris, do you know the actual? It's what Hot OSM stands for, because it's a double, right?
Yeah,
do you know the full?
It's the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. OpenStreetMap, yeah. So it's the ATM machine, automated teller machine. Yeah. So this is the tasking manager, and what's happened is since the earthquake. So just to introduce this to people who are not familiar, the tasking manager of Hot OSM. So they'll put up certain tasks for mapping. It could be for humanitarian purposes, and this earthquake that happened in Turkey is a prime example of that. So what happens is, someone like the Red Cross or the World Food Programme will need the latest data on the ground. They might need to know where the roads are. They might need to know how many people are in a certain area or how many buildings, and they need that up to date so that if they need to deliver aid, if they need to get certain places, they need to know how much, they need to know where to go. So this is a massive effort that needs to be done very, very quickly, especially when in these humanitarian crises or natural disasters. So I think what happened here, from when I was looking at it, I think the Red Cross have been coordinating with Hot OSM. So what happens is they'll put out a task and they say, we have an image of a certain area. If you could just zoom in, Erin.
Yeah, and they'll put a brief and they'll say, okay, this is the certain area, and then this is the key that we're operating on, and they'll separate the area into small blocks. And what those blocks do, you can click onto one of those blocks to take that task as yours. And once you click in there, there'll be a satellite image, the latest satellite image that you can then look at. And what happens is AI has taken a snapshot of that area, and then it will have tagged certain areas, like certain houses, for example, certain buildings, certain roads. And what people can go in and do to contribute to this effort and to make the latest data available and bring everyone together to do this is to go in and start validating and say, okay, well, this is a building, this is a road, and you can draw specific roads, and then you can label it as, okay, this is a pedestrian route, this is a dirt track, so that the people on the ground who are doing the humanitarian work, they might be, like I said, they might be delivering food, they might be, here it is, yeah. So here's an example of this. So a person would come in and say, I'm going to do this task, this is my block, and they would come in, and an artificial intelligence program has tagged these buildings and said, is this the correct tagging? So that you can go in and check it and say, okay, I need to move it a slight touch to make sure that it matches, and then you can verify that to say, hey, there's a building there. So what this does is, if you do that in a certain area, all of the buildings can then be tabulated and say, okay, well, there are 300 buildings in this area, estimated population could be X, we need to get down this public dirt road, or pedestrian road, go down this dirt track. So all of that intelligence has just been crowdsourced, it's been verified by people from around the world, and then the people on the ground have the latest up-to-date information. I just think, like, when I was going through this, I just think it's just amazing, and how quick some of the map areas have been filled in, because once it's filled in, it will go green, as you saw in the example earlier. So people around the world are doing this right now. They're tagging roads, they're verifying the AI. I think it's a fantastic example of how powerful open data can be, especially in a crowdsourced environment.
I just wanted to speak something here on open data, just to clear up, because I think there's often some confusion that this kind of hot OSM is only something you would need in maybe developing countries like Syria or war-torn places, and you wouldn't ever need it in developed countries, but because the data would already exist. But often this is not about the data not existing or not existing. A lot of the problems you get in disaster zones is communication breakdown. So a lot of the data may already exist in proprietary systems inside Turkey or Syria, but if the chain of command that can authorize that data being released is broken in some way because of the disruption that's been caused by an event like this, people are killed, they're injured. Maybe that you have a server room that has the data on that server room's being destroyed, or people who are usually working in one sector have been repurposed and they're working over here now. So it's a very, very chaotic scene when these kind of things are happening. So being able to have use open source data to paint a clear and up-to-date picture of what's happening on the ground and have data that anybody can use is really powerful. So, I gave that example earlier from Haiti, how the communication system had broken down. The different emergency responders and groups were having trouble communicating each other and painting a clear picture. And an example of how those records can be destroyed, a great story from Cambodia. One of the guys I work with is an irrigation engineer, and he was in Phnom Penh in the late 80s, early 90s. And with Phnom Penh, all of the city records have been destroyed. All of the cities about where the sewage system and the underwater water mains have been destroyed, and they did not know where the pipes were. So you had city blocks, an area of the cities that hadn't had running water for years because the mains hadn't been maintained, been destroyed in some cases, and they didn't even know where they were to fix them. So the solution about how they found them, you kind of think about high-tech stuff, but this was the 80s, like ground-penetrating radar. That's not what they did. What the authorities actually did is they cleared out entire city blocks of everybody. They got everybody out of the entire city block, all of the traffic, all of the cars, and then they used sound. They literally used cones that they put on the streets and walked around the streets to be able to hear the water moving over the pipes, and they remapped the water mains network of Phnom Penh using that manual system, and then built up a picture of where they were, and then they could start the rehabilitation. So that's why why open data is so important, because you don't know when you're going to need it. This is why all governments and all organizations should make important data open, because the chain of command that can allow you to issue closed data to somebody might break down at the point where you need it most. So if this data is in the public domain, it's extremely helpful.
And private providers of this data as well, they do often make this make their own data sets available for these purposes. I think you mentioned you had an example earlier, Maxar or something, but you have to wait for that to happen, or you might have to go and wait for them to respond. Whereas if it's more open, you can just go and get it. I think that's the key difference, right?
Yeah. Well, there's some teams that, to give the benefit of the doubt here a little bit, there are some things, like think about the water mains network in Phnom Penh. That does not change very often. Okay, that's not something that where you need the most up-to-date data. Once you've raised, the mains are where the mains are. So if that data had been in the public, obviously we're talking about a period in time where everything wasn't on the internet. But now, if that data was made public, you get into a situation like this. If you have some of these cities in Turkey where the water's cut off, maybe the guy who's the head of the water authority for planning, he's not available, something's happened. You don't have access to that data. If the data was public and it was already open and it was somewhere online where everybody could get it, you could pull that data up. Emergency responders could see, oh, we can't use the water main for the fire engine here, it's not working, but we can see that this is maybe where there'd be another main, and you can operate in that regard. But the other side, the type of data that actually needs to be up to date, is your satellite imagery, your aerial stuff. Okay, so that's the kind of data that you can't have these historic records that are online because it's not much good. Having a satellite image from 10 years ago about some of the cities in Turkey is not going to be as helpful as having one from yesterday. So we can actually, monitor where the most damage is from the air, and you could probably use that to coordinate your emergency response. So what I was going to look at and share with you guys, maybe Aaron, if you could pull up my screen, is I was going to look at some data here from Maxar. So Maxar have their open data program, so we can see they're providing what they call analysis-ready data. So analysis-ready data is Maxar's subscription service providing users access to time series stacks of imagery with specific processing, atmospheric compression, radiometric correction, or anyway, a lot of long words, complex stuff to minimize the work and time required to devise answers. So you can come in here, you can sign up to the form, and what they have is they have about 100 aerial photography scenes, and they have before and after. So they have what was the most recent they had prior to the earthquake, and then here are scenes that were taken during the earthquake. The data is quite comprehensive, so I'm not going to download it all here, but to give you an idea of the outputs that have come from Maxar, I'm going to take a look at this story here from The Guardian, where they've taken some of this open data. So in this case, they've used open data for a news story. In other cases, the same satellite imagery will be used by first responders. And this is the great thing about data that's available. So just want to go down here under got the fill-in form there. It's not there, but the Maxar data that's open is available under Creative Commons. So with the Creative Commons license, you can use it for anything. If a news organization wants to use that imagery in order to create awareness around this subject and educate people about the story, they can. If an emergency response unit want to use it in order to do better planning, they can. So there's absolutely no restrictions. So we can look here on these kind of time series sliders that can show the before and after. So on the left, we've got September 2019. On the right, February 17th. So what we can see here, you can get a couple of pictures. So one, the main damage that you can see is this factory here. It looks like the roof's caved in. But what you can also see is the response effort. So we can see on the picture on the right that there are lots and lots of aid tents that have been set up. And we can also see a very high amount of traffic on the roads here. So we look on the left, looks like this is quite a small area. Normally, whilst here we can see lots of white vehicles, I'm assuming they're emergency vehicles, and we can see lots of tents here, which I would presume are aid tents. Mm-hmm. The second picture here, this one's sort of a more of a scene of the devastation. We can see entire buildings in this image that have collapsed. Now, when you're working with an earthquake thing, the scale of the devastation is huge. Think about like a 9/11 type response. These buildings aren't as big as the Twin Towers, but there's some big buildings that have gone down. Imagine think how chaotic and how difficult that 9/11 response was when it was in one place and you were dealing with one building. Now imagine 50 9/11 style building collapses, or 100 happening over towns spread out of hundreds of miles. How do you coordinate the response? So you need to know very quickly where have we got the most devastation, where do we need to allocate the most resources. So we scroll down here. So here's another one, another image here, which looks, this looks like an area that's had less damage, but we can see there's a high rise here that's gone down. It's over. Here we can see pretty much a traffic jam of response vehicles on the right. So this is where coordination is important as well. You send too many responders to one place, you can actually have a situation where the roads are blocked up and you can't get the people out that you need to get out because the roads are in chaos. Another one here with some downed buildings. Yeah, this one we can see here. There's a whole city block. These look like mid-rise buildings here. Looking on the image, maybe like 10, 11 stories, and there's like literally 12 of them down on that block. Scene of sort of absolute devastation. So, big props to the satellite providers that are making important data sets open and up to date. That's really cool.
Yeah, the scale of the challenge really does come to life. Really, when you explain it, it's in a crisis like that, the communication element, the organization element that comes into that, of how you manage that, how you manage resources, just the scale of the challenge that they must be facing right now it really brings it home looking at these images, I feel.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is how the open source community is pulling together in order to curate this data. How many different channels that we have. If we go onto the let's go onto we were talking before about humanitarian OpenStreetMap team. So we can see how digital platforms can be used to coordinate groups. So Twitter's a great one here. So we can see, if we just go through these tweets in order and see the conversations here. So if you're looking to do some Turkey Syria earthquake solidarity mapping, and you like to do it with others, here's a bunch of community mapathons being organized. Check out osmcal.org for details. So what we can see here is you can actually come together in virtual environments to do this work as a team, or you can actually come together in person, in-person events where we'd all meet in a cafe, all bring our laptops and coordinate. And this is amazing how, there's an old saying, isn't there, of like charity starts at home, begins at home. Is it starts at home or begins at home? And
begins at home. Yeah.
Yeah. So I always took that to mean is you should concern yourself with the things that you have the capacity to change in some way. So charity begins at home. There's no point in overly concerning myself with something happening traditionally, with something happening on the other side of the world, because I have no capacity to impact that in any way. So it's far better to look at the problems that are on your own doorstep. So, in Bristol here, it might be winter, homelessness. There's something that I could do that's right here on my doorstep. I could help with bedding, I could help with food. But now when we live in the modern world, where we're interconnected, now all of a sudden we can have positive impacts in places that are very far away from us, like Turkey, because we could organize a hot OSM group where we're going to come together in a cafe here in Bristol, and we're going to map a specific village, or we're going to go through some of the what were they called, Lawrence, on the map before the
tasks?
A task.
Yeah, so there's tasks. There's 4 live right now that people are working through. Probably, like you said, people meeting up in cafes or meeting up in chat rooms on the internet. So yeah.
And this is kind of like just to pivot this onto MapStack at the moment. So I love OSM. The idea that we've got basically an open map of the entire world is absolutely awesome. But there's another side of open data that's not. I think the best way to describe it is when I'm speaking to somebody who knows nothing about mapping, and I talk about maybe just GIS in general, and they don't know what GIS is, and they ask me, what do you do? And I say, I work in mapping. And they go, like Google Maps, and I say no. Like the way I often describe it is, imagine Google Maps is everything that you would see if you looked outside of an aeroplane window. Okay, it's what's on the ground. It's the buildings, it's the roads, it's the bus stops, and there's some metadata attached to that. What's the name of this shop and these other things, and that's what OSM is. It's that what you look outside of the window. But there's another layer of data that's metadata. It's data about those things you see on the ground. So that could be socioeconomic data, demographic data. Some of that data is also interesting in emergency response. If you're looking to direct your responses in Turkey, imagine you're an organization, you've been airlifted in, you know nothing about the ground. You might want to know, where are the places we could have the most positive impact here? Where are the places that are likely to be struggling the most? Because maybe they were struggling before this earthquake even happened. And like we were talking about, water mains is a good example in Cambodia. Okay, the OpenStreetMap's going to get a bit busy if you've got all of the water mains and all of the electricity lines and all of this kind of infrastructure layer. So I think we need a place on the internet, a central hub for all of that kind of open location data that doesn't fit in OSM, because I think the two have a lot of synergy. So I'd love a world, with MapStack in the future, where something like this happens on the ground. You could have something like Hot OSM, where it's all about, right, let's map the buildings, let's map the parcels, let's map what we can see out of the aeroplane window, or in this case, via the satellite imagery. But there might be another effort that says, let's go and grab all of that other metadata about demographics, socioeconomics, infrastructure, the kind of things that wouldn't be on OSM, and let's pull that together into MapStack. So we have this massive resource of open data, and once it's available there, it's available forever.
Yeah. So they could go and check, like you said, like where the water mains are, where are the electricity lines. All of that could be condensed down onto a single map, right? Yeah,
definitely. They like water mains and electric lines. In theory, they could go into OSM type stuff as well, because there's still stuff that you can see out of an aeroplane window. But the map that you showed in the beginning was a good example. Where were the earthquakes? Where were the afterquakes? Like temporal data. Okay. So we use, for MapStack, we use OSM. Our base maps are OSM. They're what gives the user context about where they are. But most of the things that are being mapped in MapStack are the things that sit on top of that. They're abstract things like poverty and population, or they could be, where earthquakes have been, where are the earthquake zones, where are the fault lines.
Hey, Chris, going off of that, I actually, I don't have a map, a specific map that I'd like to showcase today, but just coming off of this open data, if Aaron could share what I've got.
So while Michael's pulling that up, we've got some new mics today, so hopefully the sound quality's better. You'll see Michael's not got the stand for it yet, but we've got these Yeti blue mics. Lawrence has got the same thing.
Yeah. Here we go. So I just wanted to say, where we are here in Cambodia, we've got some pretty good resources, not just in Cambodia, but it's actually throughout Southeast Asia, is this Open Development Cambodia. And they've got just heaps and heaps, if I'm not mistaken, thousands of data sets just specific to Cambodia. And sort of going off of what you had mentioned, it's not Google Map type maps stuff. It's that metadata like land cover, forest cover, elevation models, things that you're not going to find typically on something like Google Maps. And oftentimes it'll either be in a PDF format or it'll be like you see here, where you're able to find the correct format you need for whatever mapping service to be able to read that data. And in this case, the one I just had pulled up was this is annual land cover here in Cambodia. And this is pretty cool. Open Development Cambodia, they have some of these already mapped out there on their website, where you can see, what that land cover looks like. They also have things like the maps we looked at last year, or last podcast, about population data. They have data about different diseases that are carried by mosquitoes, like malaria and those sorts of things. but I didn't think we had anything like this in the U.S. Years ago when I was back there, and it's really interesting now. We've got Aaron actually was the one that turned me on to this. That you can just go and there's whatever you can think of in terms of data that could be represented. It's already been collected and put out here for you to see. It's just a really interesting resource that I've used for little projects of my own in the past. So,
what's the source of a lot of the data? Is it more like NGOs? Is there?
I can tell you this because I've worked on a few of these.
Yeah, I was about to say Chris and Aaron. They probably
I've worked on them. I know where they're from. So what usually happens here is there will be projects like development aid projects, usually funded by maybe the World Bank, Asia Development Bank. The various UN agencies, and then they'll tend to be run through the government. And this is actually a really interesting topic because it's something that's very important. So usually as part of the project, the stipulation will be that the outputs from the government for these projects that are funded by the World Bank have to be open. But one of the big problems is that often involved you having to build your own open data portal to host the outputs of the project. Now, what would happen is the nature of development aid is it's like fixed cost project. So they'll calculate how much it costs for 5 years. And part of the project is they'll build some kind of map server that's going to host this data. And as sure as night follows day, once the funding ends after 5 years, the lights go off on the server and the data's lost. This happens a lot. So there's this repeat work that happens all around the world of these hundreds of thousands even of these small open data portals or these data portals. And they're very brittle and they're not very resilient. So I think what we need with open data, what I'd love MapStack to be, is like the GitHub of open data. Because open source software used to be a bit like that back in the day. The projects would be scattered all over the internet. And, if somebody lost interest in the project and stopped maintaining it, they'd often just disappear. But since we've got GitHub, it's almost like we have this catalog, this global catalog that will persist this code and these projects forever. So I think we need that. We need that for open data. And I think in Cambodia, Open Development Cambodia is trying to be that. It was trying to get all of the open data for these various projects for Cambodia and putting them in one portal that would persist. But that's only Cambodia. We need something like that for the entire world. Another thing while we're on this, while we were talking about the data collection on this, I was working on a project where we were doing forest change cover. So a very controversial subject in Cambodia is the amount of forest cover, because there's been very heavy deforestation. And this is a political issue. There's a lot of money in forestry, and there's often stipulations around aid money, or there has been in the past, that you have to prevent deforestation. So the government often didn't want you to get hold of the old data because it might not tell a very flattering story.
Right.
So I was involved in a project called the Cambodia Atlas. And it was actually the Danish government that was funding that. Danida is their aid organization. It's the equivalent of USAID and they had real trouble getting the historical forestry data, even though that data had been made open at the time as part of a World Bank project. The server that it was hosted on had since died and the government's holding it, and they weren't super keen on sharing it. So this is where I wonder whether in the future, obviously we have an issue like the Turkey earthquake. The Turkey earthquake is something that came out of nowhere. It's very relevant right now. So it's kind of, I'd say it's like a high tempo, a high action, a high energy type thing. But I think there's going to be other humanitarian things that are slightly slower burn that communities could get around, like deforestation would be an interesting one. So you can actually use satellite imagery and spectral analysis to know what type of land cover that you have. But it's expensive work, it takes a lot of hours, and usually involves these big projects. I wonder whether in future that kind of work could be done by crowdsourcing, where we can sit there and we can monitor, how much primary forest has Cambodia got this year? And if we were given open data, can we see how much it's got next year? And just to shine a light on these things. I think this is where open data's really, really important. I don't like to think anybody's a bad actor, but so I try to always look at things through a positive lens. But I do think that when you know that somebody is doing a counter effort to what you're doing, it kind of keeps you honest and it keeps you motivated to do the best job possible. I'm not saying people, maybe in this public sector are not motivated, but they have a lot of competing priorities, and it's kind of difficult. But open efforts will probably keep you focused. We looked at the Nicola Bulley case in the beginning. The police in that case, I'm sure they're doing everything they can, and I'm sure they're professional. But to know that there's this counter effort that's going on that might pick up something that you've missed, that's just going to give you that extra little bit of let's just have another look at that. Let's just go a little bit harder. Okay.
Yeah, keep you accountable, right?
Yeah, keep you accountability. Yeah, accountability. Yeah, accountability. And then the same thing with what we're talking about with forestry in Cambodia. Now, if there's these counter efforts going on, and you're the Cambodian government, you're thinking, well, if we've got this national reserve here that we're not supposed to be chopping any trees down, but we've been turning a blind eye while trees were getting chopped down there, we're going to get found out on that. Maybe we better nip it in the bud now. So this level of accountability, I think it's really good to be able to that we don't have to just accept the word of the authorities and the powers that be. We have a mechanism whereby we can effectively fact check them, double check what they're doing, to make them accountable and keep them honest. And like I said, I'm not saying here that people in those positions are dishonest, but I do understand that there's a lot of politics involved in these things, and there's a lot of competing priorities
and incentive.
Incentive. Yeah, there's a lot of competing incentives. So if if you know you're going to get called out on some of these things, I think it's a good place to be.
Yeah, for sure. And this is a problem all over the world. It's not just Cambodia. I mean, there are environmental issues going on all over the world that could be helped via this model, especially seeing that task manager earlier, of people working together and being able to keep whatever environmental issue to account that they care about. And people do really care about these issues, whether it's forestry or animal extinction, things like this. They can be tracked. It could be super powerful if that mechanism was in place to do that. So
one of the most interesting meetings I was ever in was it was a meeting with Danida, World Bank, high-level government officials in Cambodia, and it was about deforestation. I was just a tech guy. I'm not one of the guys around the table. I'm not in the meeting. I'm just there to run the slide deck and show the maps or do whatever was on there. And in that meeting, they some of the people from the embassies and the world, they've been very critical about Cambodia and deforestation. And one of the guys from the Danish embassy, I think he's retired now. I won't mention his name, but he made a really interesting point. He said our countries all grew rich from depleting our own natural resources. So Western countries, we grew rich from depleting our own natural resources. You look at a country like the UK or a lot of Western Europe. We deforested it. We stripped all of our own resources. We grew rich on the back of that. When we were done stripping our own natural resources, we then headed over to other people's countries and got to work on stripping theirs. And now where we're in this position of wealth and privilege, we feel that we can go to developing countries that haven't got around to stripping theirs yet and say, you can't do that. Do what we say, not what we do. And Cambodia was a great example. They were being super critical of Cambodia. Oh, there's so much deforestation, it's so bad. But I just pulled up the numbers now. According to the FAO, that's the UN Food Agriculture Organization, Cambodia has 57% forest cover. Okay, yep. And then let's see what the UK's got.
On top of that, if you compare, because I recently looked at these numbers, if you look at Cambodia, what they had 50 years ago compared to today, they've done a remarkable job maintaining their forestry, where a lot of other countries, especially in Southeast Asia, they might have went from 50 to 30 or 80 to 20, and it's just a cut in half of what they used to have.
It's a tough thing. Yeah, they get criticized, but so a country like UK that says it's got 13% forest cover, but I think they're counting people's bushes in their front gardens with some of that.
Yeah, maybe.
you pull up Google Maps and you look at the UK. I was doing this before. Like I said, I haven't worked in the UK. I don't know how the analysis is done, but in Cambodia, when they're doing the analysis, they set a pretty high bar. Primary forests, you've pretty much got to have like vines and monkeys swinging in the trees and a high bar. And then secondary forests where it's already been stripped out a bit, and but the UK. Let me pull up Google Maps a second. Maybe Aaron, you can get my screen up. So let's just switch to the satellite view. I'm not going to speculate here, but you
looks pretty green. I don't know.
Oh, it looks green. It looks green. The UK is a very green country, but if you zoom into what that greenery is, it's not forests.
It's pasture.
Yeah. We get these little, what we would call a wood. I'm not sure the UK even has something that you would class as a true forest. So we've got the New Forest down here, and then a lot of these areas, they're a long way from primary. If you get into them, a lot of the trees are in rows and they're like managed type forests. But yeah, we've got some little areas here, but for the most part, the UK's, agriculture.
And real quick, just talk about the scale too. Like, what's like the one of the big four or the forest that you just zoomed in on? Well, figure like how broad, how far across that is by your scale bar.
So let's go to the New Forest here. So the New Forest, like you can see, there's patches and there's towns in the middle, but the scale down here is 1 kilometer. So you're probably looking at like 20 kilometers from here to here. But you can see that that's not unbroken forest. There are patches in there.
Now let's look at Laos or Cambodia.
Okay, yeah. So let's look at one of the countries where that gets ripped on for deforestation. So yeah, let's go to Laos, and I'm just going to zoom in anywhere.
Anywhere, yeah. Just remote jungle.
Yeah.
Just as far as you could see.
Now I don't know Laos as well. Let's move next door into Cambodia because I know the geography there. Let's look at this. This is 5Ks, not 1K. Remember the scale when I was just looking on the UK? Right. We had that scale bar down at 1K. Let's zoom in until we get it to 1K, so we're on the same thing as the UK. You can see
that's remote, like proper remote.
Yeah, proper out there. So that's the Cardamons. I've been out there. I've been trekking in the Cardamons a few times, and we did a 3-day trek once out there with some rangers, and like how remote it was. I went 3 days where it was a really weird thing of no sign of humanity, like nothing. And I remember the moment when because we're doing a big circle and we're coming back. I remember on the 3rd day when we're on our way back, I saw an empty water bottle, a crushed up rubbish water bottle on the floor. I went, that is the first sign of humanity that I've seen in the last 3 days. It was amazing. Saw lots of like elephant dung, and I didn't really see any animals. The animals are real scared of humans. You'd hear them. There'd be lots of noise there, and there were leeches and mosquitoes and all kinds of nonsense. But yeah, it was remote, and we just don't have anywhere like that in the UK, and we've also got another one on the other side of Cambodia. So we go to where the border of Vietnam is. So this is somewhere where you, Michael, you spend a lot of time up here, don't you? Mondulkiri and Ratnakiri. Okay, you got some spots out here too that. It's a different kind of. So on the west side of Cambodia is what you would typically think of as a rainforest, isn't it? Michael, you're the farming guy.
Yeah. So I would say, your Cardamom Mountains. That's they're taller, they're closer together. Whereas I don't know how you define the Mondulkiri Mountains. They call them mountains, but they're more like rolling hills, where like you can stand at the top of one and you can see. They're not that high, but a lot more windy. They have a lot more fires too, so you get a lot more like, if this ground cover picture is taken, by satellite data, during the dry season, it's going to look like a wasteland. But during the, spring and summer when it's pouring rain, it'll all be lush. It'll look really nice, actually.
Yeah, it's like bush. I think, this is an interesting thing with satellite imagery. I know from Cambodia, when you're in a place that has the monsoons, then traditionally you'll be capturing the scenes during the dry season because you don't want the cloud cover there. So if you're doing aerial photography or you're doing satellite imagery, that's when you're going to do the capture, because if you come over this in the wet season, you're not going to see a whole lot. So what tends to happen is you'll see the driest time of the year in the images. So it's like one of those
biases
that you look at this and go,
you might see a fire if you you zoom in far enough.
Yeah, same reason. A lot of, in the West, some places, it's the middle of winter in the satellite imagery because that's that kind of blue sky, crisp. Best time to do your aerial photography. So that's there. So it would be interesting to have a situation in the future where we have this kind of like slower burn humanitarian open data stuff, where maybe we could be mapping things like forestry. We could be taking like sort of certain socioeconomic data points that are buried deep in spreadsheets and in like government reports or World Bank reports, and bring those together into a format that's accessible to everybody, so everybody can like jump in there and see what's going on.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would really get behind that as well. So I think we finished the podcast in a really positive, looking forward manner.
Yeah, we brought it back.
I think to leave the listeners with something, a bit more of a vision for going forward. I think that's something that, for me personally, and I'm sure you two as well, that just sounds very exciting. So.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe the next podcast we'll do a little bit more upbeat beat, because what we're doing, missing persons, natural disasters, deforestation. I think all we're missing was pestilence. We had the.
Next week will be more upbeat, I reckon.
Yeah, next time we'll be more upbeat.
Sure.
I've actually got some really fun stuff. So what I want to do in next week's podcast, I'll just put it out there now, sneak preview for everyone, is like mapping games. So have you seen Wordle? Do you guys do Wordle?
I used to.
New York Times game where you have to choose 5 letters and you have to guess what the word is, and play it. It's addictive. They have a new puzzle every day. There's another one called Wordle. Wordle, like there's an L in there, an extra L. World. And in Wordle, what they do is they show the outline of a country every day, and you have to guess what it is. And then when you make the guess, it will show you how many miles away your guess was from where the actual country was. So that's a like really fun game that we play here in the office each day, and it really tells me like how crap my geography is for most of the world. If it pulls up anything in Southeast Asia and a lot of Europe, I'm kind of okay. Anything in South America or Africa, I'm absolutely terrible. And then there's another game where they use Google Street View, and they'll just drop you anywhere on Earth, and you've got to just zoom around and look at the cars and look at the signs, and you have to put a point on the map to guess where you are.
I saw a video of a guy doing that, and he's just dropping him somewhere, and he's like, and it's just rapid. He just knows where he is.
There are some people on there who spend way too much time on it. Absolute black belts. I consider it a win if I get within like 500 miles. I'm like, I'm in the right continent. I did pretty well, but some of these guys get it down to like the village. It's so interesting, and I've got some other little games as well. So I think that's what we're going to do in the next one. Okay. We're going to bring some games that are made possible by open location data, and we're going to have a little bit of a play at them, and maybe we'll have a bit of a competition between myself,
cash prize.
Michael, and Lawrence. Cash prize. We'll get a cash prize. Win a new microphone. Yeah. Okay.
Well, look forward to that then.
All right.
Cool.
Awesome. All right,
guys. I'll see you next week.
Michael, the background there. Usually we've got some jiu-jitsu practitioners turning up by now.
I told him to come in and be sparring in the background, and that would be like fine. They're like worried. I got a couple guys sitting here on the couch now. They're like, no, it's fine. I'm like, no, just go kill each other in the background.
Okay.
It'd be great.
Well, next week's one's going to be more fun. So give them a part. Actually, encourage them next week while we're playing the Geo games. We want to see some fights in the background. Okay.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. So we'll wrap it up there then, guys.
Yep.
Sounds good. All right, guys. See you next week.
Over and out.
See you next week, guys.